Gentlemen, today I was like, man, it would be a good day to install my Trailblazer SS intake and get these tests out of the way. So, that's what I did. I got everything together and bolted it on, and I was like, well, I'll figure out the throttle a little bit later, but I got a piece ahead of time, and that ended up working, so it's pretty much ready to go. I'm going to make sure the intake piping doesn't blow off, because my one angle kind of sucks, but everything is ready to go. I'm going to show, obviously how I do it here. Try to speed through most of it because it was a shit fest. I was like, grab my intake, trying to find things. I couldn't find the damn coupler, but you know what? I got her all done. Got everything bolted in. It's running. Check for leaks. Everything else doing good. So by the weekend, I should have it on the dyno, and we will see what it makes. What do we pick up? I mean, everybody pretty much does pick up, but we're going to see how much, right? And literally, I'm just pulling the intake piping out, getting everything ready, cut a bunch of zip ties, start disconnecting the electronics, and, preparing to swap the intake. Taking all these vacuum connections off, getting all these clamps out of the way, zipping everything off with Milwaukee 12-volt madness, also goodness, consolidating some T-bolt clamps, get that throttle body out of there, cut another 12, 13, 14 zip ties, and we're ready to rock. And man, it's hard to see some of this stuff under the hood here. What are we going to do about that? We slapped that dang Milwaukee fangled underhood light on and get to business. And another thing I'm pretty happy with is I did this regulator ahead of time because I needed it, and also I needed it for the Trailblazer intake because it has a returnless rail. So it was good to get that done ahead of time. That saved some time. I think I completed this in an hour and a half today with lots of hang-ups. I was a mess. The weather sucks. It's snowing, a little bit of rain. I didn't get much sleep, and it's been a while, and I moved garages, so just finding everything that I needed was painful again. And get everything out of the way and lift this guy and pull the brake booster, and voila, it's a boy. Stash that thing up there and get the stuff ready. Looking pretty clean. Looking nice. Looks like a little bit of oil or something's blowing out of some of the intake ports. We'll grab that other intake. Onward again with the fast forwarding through the boring parts. I'm just blazing off the bolts that hold the rails down. I'm going to swap the injectors out. These are the 210s still with the FIC injector adapters. I'm going to box up these FIC adapters and send them to my friend that bought the 105s because he sent me CBM Motorsports aluminum spacers, so I put those on my Trailblazer intake this time around. And yes, I am running the larger China throttle body. I wanted to try it out. I don't think the throttle body does much, obviously, in a forced induction application. So I think what I might do is buy the 3-bolt to 4-bolt adapter and bolt it on right after this test and see the power difference between the larger and the smaller intake. I don't think it'll be much, so it'll be neat to test. But yes, that is one of, I think it's the G+. I have to look it up, honestly, where I bought it off eBay. They're all pretty similar. I actually bought it with the sensors, so I wouldn't have to do anything. So they're China sensors. There I am. I'm using high temp axle grease. I like to use that on my injector O-rings. It works great. I don't have any issues with it. So, bam. There she is. And this was a bitch to line up because with the spacers on and some other things, it gets everything a little bit out of the way. And I think my fuel rail's bent slightly, but either way, got that thing down, breeze down those bolts, get ready to toss it in the engine bay, and call it a day. Here we are tossing that old girl in there. My buddy Derek Gaskins sent this intake. I don't even know what it's out of, but obviously it's a new body truck intake or a Trailblazer intake, or I like to call it the breadbox intake. Don't know why. I heard somebody say it once. Breezing down those 8 millis. Brap, 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 brap. And continue on with the show. Plugging in my injectors, plugging in my coils, and you know what, guys? The injector adapters that I got were a lifesaver because, honestly, on these truck intakes, the injector is so small and so low and so buried underneath the fuel rail in the intake, it would be really hard to get to them, I think, without having the slightly longer, adapter on there to plug it into the stock plugs. Makes it nice and easy. I realized my IAT sensor was missing, and I actually had a thread-in 3/8 one for like a Typhoon on hand, and the top port on the intake there was roughly just under 3/8, and I wanted to breeze it in there, but the plastic piece actually spun, so we'll see how that ends up holding up. So I actually ran a tap in there first and then breezed this guy down in there. Next, I grabbed that fuel pressure regulator and fuel lines and hook it up to this returnless here rail and get everything snuggied down, and that's the next step in this whole process. Next here, I was working on getting all the vacuum lines connected that I ended up removing, so I decided to just breeze a hole into the intake and put in a barb fitting and connect that guy to the regulator, so the boost source for the regulator. So I tapped this and black RTV this punk and then threaded in and end up running that to the regulator. And then later on, I don't think I got it on video, I teed it and ran the nylon boost gauge hose into the tee with some rubber hose and like 4 zip ties. So I ended up doing that also, so the boost gauge is still functional. Okay, here I am explaining that this thing is pretty much ready to start. So I'm going to check for fuel leaks, and after I check for fuel leaks and don't have any, I will start it and check for leaks while it's running and get the throttle body adjusted. It has a stopper on it, and I got to get the ECU familiarized with it, set a stop point, check the steps. I might have to reset my TPS, which I do have to because I have to adjust the physical stop, do a bunch of other messing around, and it took me a little bit to get the Allen key that actually fits it. Again, my brain was operating at 25% today, but still got this done in about an hour and a half. Pretty happy with that, so let's jump right to the start. I have to do a TPS reset once it's running. Yep. Now it doesn't want to go into closed loop. Gotta pop these two connectors. It also has a China IAC on it, so we'll see what that does. Do that. Key on. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. My fuel dribbles seem to be okay. The other guys with these China throttles seem to have a little bit of issues, so we'll see how that goes, right? As with everything. Key back on. Okay, so now I'm going to throw my throttle linkage on, and I have a stock drive-by-wire, not drive-by-wire, drive-by cable. I always want to say wire because you're using a metal wire basically, but anyway, I got a throttle cable linkage, like the metal plate that goes on top of the intake from another Gen 3 truck, and it does not fit into the side of the throttle body. The hole's too small. So I drill it out a little bit, and that works out, and then I end up realizing, you know, I want to put my plate somewhere so I can pull the throttle, and I show all of that, and I end up putting it in the other hole and using one of the bolts in the intake. We're going to see if it ends up moving. It's probably going to need supports. This drill bit is so bent. I show later, it just like wobbles around like junk, but I get all this done. I got my throttle linkage hooked up, and I'll show a better close-up of that completed and working. Yeah, now I found my 4 to 3 inch coupler straight. It took me too long to find, and I messed with this stuff and fitting it, and it's not perfect. It could be a little bit better. I was a little unhappy with it, but I just made it work for now. The angle going into the throttle body is real funny, and the T-bolt clamp, I had to put 2 of them together. I couldn't get the size I needed because it's like it should be like 3 1/4 because it's sideways part of the pipe is in there. And, you know, but it's there. It's good. It's definitely going to be fine, and everything I have fit. So let's just jump ahead where I show where the throttle linkage and everything else is working out, because this is just me being a retard. So here we go. All done. Ready to make some boost. You can see I'm using the top hole in the throttle, and that's a Gen 3 regular throttle linkage thing bolted into a regular bolt hole in the Trailblazer intake. Everything's doing good. You can see my injector spacers, no leaks. Truck's running. So at this point we're ready for testing. And I'll do a little bit more overview, you know, once we get it on the dyno and see what kind of power it makes.